Sarah, your profile stand-in pic is adorable.
Thanks. I figured if I don't have blonde hair anymore, I shouldn't have a blonde photo.
That makes sense. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to hear all your wisdom as usual.
Well, a couple minutes to join.
Can you guys believe the election is like, I guess in a week, we're all going to be like, huh, that's over.
Maybe it'll be over.
I'm like looking at the news obsessively.
Yeah, you know, I was just listening to a talk about Walter Wallace Jr. and who was just killed by police 2 days ago, and listening to his son speak was, I don't know, maybe the saddest thing I've heard all year. It was like his 8-year-old son. It was if you want to listen to it, because it's worth listening to, it's about defunding the police and reinvesting in community services, but they talk to his family, and it's today's episode, I think, of Democracy Now, which is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but it's a really heartbreaking talk and heavy stuff right now. We were just talking, I don't know if any of you come to the Monday call, but we were just talking about maybe doing a thing about how to support each other. And is Jimena here? Jimena, well, I'm going to derail this thing, and I know we're trying to start. So maybe I'll shut up.
No, that's okay. You can keep talking if you want.
Well, Jimena had this great idea about sort of like proactively coming up with ideas about how people can support their staff, volunteers, people in the organization following the election, and talked about how after the last election, she was, just struggled a lot. And I know I did too. And there wasn't really space for that because it was still back in the days when I feel like maybe it was considered in government organizations to be impolite to talk about politics. I think the gloves are off on that one this year. So yeah, I don't know. It's maybe something we can talk about on the calls Friday and Monday.
Yeah, like whether it's a meeting just to come on and just vent to each other, or just the okay to not, show your face in a meeting, or just like different suggestions for self-care. Like, yeah, exactly. Last election, I felt like there was a death in my family is how like emotional I was. So I'm just thinking we need to be prepared for the worst just in case and support each other because it's going to be hard.
Totally agree. I'm even wondering if this space next week could be used for that in some way, potentially just brainstorming.
Well, maybe if we have a little time, we can talk about it at the end.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure some more people will probably hop on as we get going, but I'm really excited to have Kristen okay. It's come up a few times in this call that people need some tips and some ideas about how to bring staff along with all of the changes that are happening in all of your organizations. And so Kristen has had a lot of success in bringing staff along with Haas and even figuring out new ways to elevate staff through all of the changes. So Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about?
Yeah. Hey, Rory, I'm wondering if it's, I know I won't be able to find it because I'm working out of 3 inboxes right now, but do you know where we can easily pull up that how to pilot a program document? I know it's somewhere, but I'd like to have that because I think it's relevant for today. And if I go searching for it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll grab that. And I know that it actually, there's a course now on Maddie's University about piloting. Kelly, do you have any info about that course?
I'm on the call. I can put the link to it in the chat. This
Oh,
is
thanks,
Erica.
Erica.
Sure.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Hassan. I think I know most of you. I recognize almost everyone's name here, but I'm the outgoing director of Pima Animal Care Center and the incoming director of American Pets Alive, overseeing the Haas programs, the Maddie's Academy, and the other.
Take this up, or do you get them first?
The other Maddie's Fund American Pets Alive program. So I have also been leading municipal organizations, government organizations for the last over 8 years. And in that time, I think probably the hardest part of my work has been the first year of being in any organization. Nathan Winograd, who he founded the No Kill Advocacy Center. He famously said to me when in my time in Austin that the first year running an animal shelter, you're going to want to stab your eyes out every day, but you won't be able to because there's going to be a long line of your employees waiting to stab them out for you. And that always really struck with me because it's very true. And if any of you have taken over a leadership role in a new organization, you know this feeling I'm talking about, but creating change, especially when you oversee staff and volunteers, is difficult. So the first thing I want to ask though is just get a little bit of read on the group. And you're just going to have to either put in the chat or shout it out because I don't have a poll question. Are you mostly trying to compel people that are lateral to you or above you or to create change, or are you mostly directing staff and trying to encourage volunteers and people that report to you to create change?
And I can call in a couple people too to answer this question that I know this has come up for. Chris, do you want to answer that question? I know you've just had a lot of really good questions on this topic.
Sorry, was that me you called on?
Yes.
I was typing and then the voice came in and out. I was just going to say, yeah, for us, it's been working mostly with staff and volunteers to get them up to speed and on board. And, some in both categories are seasoned at what they've been doing and struggling with whether it's change or how it's being rolled out or how we're communicating or not communicating.
And Erica, do you want to add anything? I know you were also curious about this topic a month or so back.
I don't know how you keep track of all that. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that mostly it's the people below me. Our managers are pretty progressive and will pretty much sign up for everything. But most of our staff has been with the shelter for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, even if they're frontline staff. And so it's really hard to ingrain them in new things. And even, the pilot program thing is how we normally roll things out, but mainly it's been returned to field friendlies. That has been the biggest cross to bear over the last year.
And in the chat, a lot of people have said staff and volunteers, staff trying to build back our volunteer program, or still trying to build back our volunteer program. So I think it's not leadership, it's staff.
Okay, so the first thing is that regardless of whether you're trying to bring along people that you work for, people that work for you, or volunteers, the rules are basically the same. And creating and managing change in animal welfare is hard because the whole system is designed to prevent it, right? So everything within the system is built so that you can't change it. And it's what we say, it's what we mean when we say the word entrenched. But what we really mean is that the foundation is built out of the laws, the ordinances, the policies, and the physical building itself. All of that is built to resist change. So do any of you feel that when you're trying to create change? Do you feel like you're working against an invisible force? And you just got to chime in and talk. Please don't be shy.
Well, I'm happy to go and say something about this. So it's easy to get just really bogged down in specific tasks. You really just don't have the bandwidth, or you don't have the staff or the volunteers to get away from that. So everybody kind of gets into that lull. And so especially if it goes on for too long, and it's really about having those conversations. I've used anonymous feedback surveys, but also having those conversations about where would you like to go with volunteering with this organization. And if everybody's in a stalemate and they really are comfortable and they really don't, they're in a niche and they really don't want to move out of that, then luckily for me, I just primarily work 100% with volunteers. So it's really about campaigning and trying to find new volunteers and having those conversations about the change that you're anticipating or that you're hoping, so that they have a good idea of what you're looking for, what your scope in your dreams, and really set that in motion when you're interviewing new people. And I think that works a lot better. That way people can remain happy and they don't leave you because you're trying to implement change that they just don't want to do. And volunteers are such a revolving door anyway. It's better just to keep moving and looking for new things.
That's helpful. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of talk off the cuff, and we may want to make a list if somebody's taking notes, because there's a few really basic things that I want to offer as starting points and then turn it back to you all. And if these ring true to you, just tell me. And if they don't, then feel free to ignore them. And as I talk, I have the benefit of, I'm in my last 3 days of running a municipal government organization, so I can speak really openly. And I will say that this is probably the first time in my career I felt that I could do that, because as government officials, we are responsible to the taxpayers. So I've overseen teams typically of 100 to 150 or more staff. But my real responsibility was to the taxpayers that we served. So the first thing is that when you're overseeing staff and volunteers, and I think this one will probably make sense to a lot of you, I have this rule, which is based off of a rule someone else came up with, but it's the 10-80-10, which is that if you imagine your staff and volunteers as a big line, the top 10%, there's going to be 10% of people that just grumble and mumble and complain about everything. So any change you try to make, 10% of your team, volunteers and staff, are always going to have a problem with it. Within that 10% at the very top of the angry face guy, you're going to have 2%. So out of that 10%, 2% of the total are going to be toxic. They're going to be people that are just hate everything and try to make everyone else hate everything. Those are actually toxic people. They're people that, like, no matter what environment they're in, no matter what they're involved with, they're going to try to derail things. That is their own shit, not yours. But that's always going to be true. Then you have the 80% who are just like, okay, whatever, I may change my mind. I'll get on board. And there's some variation. There's a lot of variation within that 80%. But the important part about that middle 80% is that they're malleable. You can form them. They're your staff who maybe when you get there, they're not very excited about you being there. But if you can explain to them why, they're going to get excited. And then at the very bottom or top, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. In this other 10%, you get 10% of people that are just going to be excited about everything. The people on these calls are almost always within that 10%. So you are the overachievers. You are the people that just think this is all really awesome. That's why you're here. And within that 10%, you're going to have the 2% that will do anything they can to make you successful. They will have your back. They will get behind you. They will support it 100%, and they'll go the extra mile to make it happen. So that is going to roughly be your ratio for everything you do. When you hear that, are you like, yeah, that seems about right? Or are you like, I don't know? Okay, I'll tell you why this matters. It matters because you have to be really careful not to let that angry, unpleasant 10% control any part of what you do. And as long as that ratio remains relatively small, so out of 100 people, 1 or 2 are going to try to completely derail whatever you're doing. As long as that ratio remains kind of small, you mostly need to just work past it and not let it upset you. In my first few years of leadership, those 1 or 2 people would keep me up at night. Like I would be awake at 3 a.m., like totally freaking out. And I spent a lot of time trying to change their minds. This is very true with my volunteer program. Like I would have these long meetings. And did anybody ever watch Golden Girls? Any Golden Girls fans here? Okay. So Rose is like the sweetest character. She's the best. But there's this episode where she has this neighbor and she tries to be friends with the neighbor, and the neighbor just like hates her. Does anybody remember this episode? And at one point she like goes to the neighbor's door and like brings her cookies, and the neighbor's like, I just don't like you. And she's like, but why? Like, why don't you like me? And the neighbor's like, I just don't like you. And I think that's that 2%. Like, you're not going to do anything to change this. You need to manage those people, but trying to change their mind is not worth your time. Now, the thing we tend to do at the other 10%, the really great people, is a problem. And I bet you all have been on the receiving end of this. Those great 10%, we put like 90% of the work on those people. So we put all of the expectations to carry the organization forward on those people. And we kind of leave that middle 80% alone. And that becomes a problem in animal welfare, because what you get is, and I'm guilty of this too, you get teams where a few people are very, very motivated. Those people are receiving a disproportionate burden of the work, and the expectation is primarily put on them. And so when it almost takes those tendencies of those people and makes them worse. It's like their atlas. Sarah Aguilar once took me to task for this, but we can't all carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And as leaders, we have to be careful not to put that. And I see this, I mentor new leaders all the time. I see this every day. They've got that 1 or 2 trusted employees and they're putting everything on them. And that actually can lead to challenges too for the organization. So we need to do a lot more as leaders to be talking to that 80%, and setting expectations for that 80%, because they're where you reach a tipping point. And in every organization I've gone into, when I've started, the organization's been like, it's been like here, and this is bad. And as I'm there, the first year is like this. It's like kind of wavering, and then slowly you get to this point and you hit the tipping point. You really do hit a tipping point with your team, and then you push them over, you push the team over. All you need is more than 50%. Like, all you need of your team to be on board is more than 50%. And you know it. If you have been in an organization where this has happened, you have felt the tipping point happen, where all of a sudden the fight and the war and the complaints are all kind of dissipating. Thoughts on what I've said so far?
Erica shared a question in the chat that I thought
you might want to get to and ask, how do you prevent those derailers from infecting the 80%?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I mean, everybody has their own strategy for dealing with those people. At every organization I've worked at, and Casey and I created one of these together. So she might want to speak about it too, but we've created a workplace culture agreement, and we've created that in a very democratic fashion. And I got this idea of how to create it. If anybody's read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is an old book by Paulo Freire, but it's he has this whole thing about when you create anything, any change in an organization, or you make a decision that's going to impact everyone, that everyone really needs to be included in that decision making and actually like agree to it, like mean it and agree to it. So we created this workplace culture agreement, but we gave some starting points, but we made the team sit down. We took about 6 months to do it. We made the team sit down, volunteers and staff, everybody had to be part of the democratic process of creating that. And then at the end, everyone in the organization, no matter their involvement, was expected to sign it. And what that did for us, and we can share a link to ours. It was just featured in Animal Sheltering Magazine. And so we can share a link to that from Pima Animal Care Center. But what that did for us is it gives you a non-disciplinary means to address a problem, but it also teaches the rest of your staff that the kind of behavior they're seeing from that 2% is not acceptable within the boundaries of the organization. And it's teaching your staff that those behaviors aren't desirable or accepted. And then the other piece I think that we tend to not do is we don't hold those people individually accountable enough. I still get terribly uncomfortable having to have hard conversations. And there's something really embarrassing about if you have that toxic staff member. Like I would have these staff members and I would have like an hour-long heartfelt talk, and they would leave my office and go and just start talking shit. And it was really hard for me. I spent years avoiding that. Like I knew it was happening. And I think the longer I've done this, I've gotten to the point where like, if they're going to leave the office and go do that, I'm going to call them right back in and say to them very patiently, we just talked about this. You have a problem with going and triangulating people. And you say one thing to one person and another to another, and that's happening here, and it needs to stop. And I think it's uncomfortable as a leader because you're kind of like embarrassed for the person. Like I find myself a lot being like, please don't make this mistake again. But it's our job as leaders, especially with the employees that I manage now come in to the organization with very little onboarding. And I think Roy's onboarding presentation, which I'm hoping we're going to get up online, is really important. But I think if we're not constantly setting those expectations and being crystal clear, our employees don't necessarily know. Like if they've seen the culture be one way, they don't know. And we have to just keep telling them patiently. I was lucky enough to be in an organization where I could say to people, we aren't going to talk about this any more times. And if we have to talk about it again, you're not going to have a job here. Now we had merit system employees and non-merit system employees. At my level, I was dealing primarily with unclassified employees that if they were going to continue toxic behavior, they weren't going to be able to stay with the organization. Many of you probably have merit or classified employees. Do you guys, any of you have classified employees who are protected by merit system rules? Any of you in government probably do.
Would that be a union, Kristen?
No, the merit system governs most local government animal shelters, and it's basically a system of rules and regulations around HR policies. And there's some things that are really good about it. There's some things that are really challenging about it. But similarly to unions, it asks us to have a higher level of accountability when enacting discipline with an employee, because I think I have good judgment about these things, but I'll tell you, I really have had to come to terms with how I've had favorite employees. Like I feel differently about some of my staff. And I think the thing that merit system's done for me that's been good is that it really does ask you to treat every person the same in terms of process. You know how I just told you about that conversation where I called a person into my office? I always do that also with another person there. Like, I don't want to make someone uncomfortable, and I want to make sure to hold myself accountable that I'm not just calling out an employee because I don't like them. All these biases, I think we don't recognize how much come into the work. And when you're trying to change culture, I spend more time on myself and making sure I'm not bringing my own stuff into this than I do on other people, because it's really easy to get heated and to get emotional. And I think when you're trying to create change, that to me, and I'm kind of going on and on about this today, because that to me is the area where we do tend to get emotional. Because if I'm trying to tell you, like Erica is, if we don't return these friendly cats to their communities, we're taking people's cats, we're creating space situations that are going to lead to animals dying. I feel really strongly about that. And when those naysayer employees are telling me no, I just get pissed. And that isn't an effective way to lead. I think when we're trying to save lives, you know, being angry can be very motivating, but to get change made, you have to have consensus. And so as leaders, we've got to, we're almost like politicians within your organization. You've always got to be building consensus with that majority while trying to minimize the damage that the minority is doing. And if you do have that problem with the toxic staff and you are having trouble holding them accountable, there's actually a lot of great stuff out there about that. Most of us need to do more reading on ways to hold staff accountable, both positively and negatively. But one of the other things that we're doing, we're trying to get better within this industry is, remember the 10% of the us's in the room who are like, let's do this. One of the challenges with that is that we also don't reward those people, nor do we often reward the 80%. And so if you're not, and I have this trouble with my mid-level managers all the time, they're really quick to write people up and to give negative reinforcement. But we have a rule: you have to do 3 rewarding feedbacks for every 1 negative feedback. And if you're not doing that, it means you probably have your ego in the process. Because if we're not doing as much to recognize people that are on board, that are trying to make change, we aren't being good leaders. And I think that this goes back to making sure you're really recognizing everyone within that big group, and that you're also elevating people who historically get pushed down in animal welfare. We just had this great call this morning on our DEI committee, but I was thinking a lot about how the staff who get the least when it comes to rewards, other than these sort of like placating, condescending rewards, like, you know, a pizza, the staff who get the least amount of direct feedback are our frontline staff. These are also most likely to be our staff of color, and our other marginalized staff are least likely to get positive feedback. And this is, and I'm saying this both anecdotally from my experience and from consulting in many other shelters. They're also most likely to get negative feedback. It's easy to hold someone accountable who doesn't get their kennels cleaned. It can be a lot harder to hold an employee accountable who is a coordinator level employee, because they're not managed in the same way, hour to hour, task by task.
I have a couple of questions for you. I'm wondering, I think that, you know, we often have a couple of people in our organizations who have a lot of cultural influence. And how do you sort of like flip someone from, because I think sometimes those folks, like it's like the type of people that if they're really excited about something, everyone's really excited. And if they're really sort of bummed out or negative about something, then they can kind of bring down the vibe. And I think those are people who tend to be, if we grow them correctly, like can be really good leaders, right? Or champions for things. So how do you kind of identify those people and make that flip, or sort of coach people from being negative to being more positive within an organization?
That is such a good question. So I think it really depends. And I think it takes some experience. And if you are not an experienced manager, meaning you haven't done it for a decade or more, you've got to continue to learn about this stuff because it's complicated. Sometimes those people are truly toxic. And that can be hard to see, and it can take a while. one of the things that I did wrong, I want to write a book called All the Things I Did Wrong Managing Animal Shelters, because there's just like hundreds of them. But one of them was that I would go in, I would get a gut instinct on people, and I would like immediately sort of like trust those people and think they were great employees. And I was going off of my own internal bias, I guess. But I often was picking people that were culturally toxic to the organization. They were really exciting though. Like you said, Rory, they were the people that get people excited or don't. And so I think one of the lessons I've learned is that it takes a year or more to really know who your employees are for the most part. You really don't know what all of this until you take some time and really pay attention. But if you do have an employee that's toxic, you do need to spend time on them. They will destroy your whole organization. I had an employee who was one of those folks, and over a course of a year came to sort of figure that out. And she actually had to be relocated out of the agency into another building. And that was not a disciplinary process. But these are the kind of things that if certain people are physically in your building, that can make everything you're trying to do almost impossible. For other people that are influencers, one strategy is to take them under your wing and to be honest with them that they are influencers and that what they do has a big impact on the organization. Now that can empower people whose egos are already too big, or it can work really well. And I think that we don't spend enough time getting to know our employees. And so we've got to do a little bit more to get to know like what motivates them. And like for me, what motivates me are two things: being trusted to be left alone. Like my boss trusts me and leaves me alone. And about once every 2 months, my boss indicates that they respect me and think I'm doing a good job. That's what motivates me. For a lot of employees, that's not what motivates them. And so we really need to understand what is meaningful and motivating our employees. And to do that, like we have to ask them. I do this thing at the end of every year with staff. Casey will remember this. Casey, remember our end of year roundup? Casey worked for me. So I don't know, Casey, if you want to jump in on any of this.
Well, I just love it because we had such a culture change. I mean, it was when I was working at Austin Animal Center, I had one director and then she left, and then we didn't have anybody for 6 months. And then Tawny and Kristen came in, and they had totally different ideas about how things were doing. Nobody really had been managed for like 6 months. So everybody was kind of doing what they thought they needed to do. Some the bare minimum. And it was dramatic. I mean, it was a lot of people, you really saw that split happen that she's talking about really quickly. And it's fascinating to look back on it now, but yeah, it was really, I think that culture document changed a lot of things. I think that was super, super helpful because it kind of set the expectation that a lot of people don't do. A lot of new managers, I think, don't really do it. Like, this is the way I expect you to behave, and and not just like you have to teach adults how to behave, but it was that this is what I care about. These are what my ideals are for what I would look for. I didn't hire any of you. So this is what I would look for in a great team. And it really bonded, and it brought out the best in a lot of people, and it brought out the worst in a few, but there really was a lot of people from that 80% that shifted over, I think.
And I'm gonna find the link to the culture agreement in a minute so I can show it to you if you haven't seen it, but it's really simple. It's stuff like no ego. I mean, we literally wrote like no egos. One of the other ones is show kindness and respect to all people and animals. This is not complicated stuff. It's very simple. Communicate directly rather than around people. So if you have a problem with someone, talk to them directly, don't go around them. Really simple like rules. It's like almost like a first grade. And we made it as a poster that we hung it. One of the, I think, geniuses of this is that the place we put it is next to the toilets in the bathroom. So no one in animal shelters sits down. If you want people in animal shelters to read something, put it next to the toilet. Or on the little stall door. That's how you get people to read things. Let's see, Kelly just pulled it up. Let me see if this is it. We've had them in a lot of different organizations I've worked in. I don't know, Kelly, I can't open that for some reason. Oh, because it's a Word doc.
Erica asked if it's the same document with volunteers.
No. Well, yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, the workplace culture agreement is the same. We also have a volunteer vision statement that adds a little, but yes, it's the same. Let's see. Thanks all. Oh gosh, this is my first one. No, that's old. Wow. I'll find it for you. When I get a chance to shut up and look for it, I'll find it for you.
I think it lives in that blog I shared.
Yeah, I think
it lives in the blog. Yeah, there it is. Okay, great. There it is. So like, be compassionate. So here's commit to healthy communication. This is written for our toxic employees. Communicate directly or upwards rather than gossiping with others. Understand differences are not wrong. Work through conflict and challenging conversations. Provide accurate, thorough, objective documentation and feedback. How many times have you had employees come and complain about each other without that? It's so frustrating. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Trust most everyone has good intentions. So if you take just that section and think about, take your toxic employee, think about if they had to actually follow those, how would that change them? And so what we do now is that we really try to minimize formal discipline of any kind. It's always my preference that people leave on their own accord, not because they were fired, but we take that document and we highlight the sections and we talk to them about how they violated those sections and or have really honest conversations with them. And usually people know, they know they're doing it and they can't help it. I don't know about you, but I have my own pattern behavior, and you kick into that pattern behavior that has been in you for a long, long time. And it's hard. And a lot of our employees have that too. Sarah Aguilar's on here, who is just, I can't say enough about what she did for PAC to change the culture. Sarah, do you want to add anything to what I'm saying? Because I think you were my tipping point. You came in as the deputy and you just changed things overnight in terms of expectations.
Thank you. I think for me, the piece that is important was actually building relationships with everybody individually and taking time to spend with each person. In a lot of like larger organizations, your frontline or your new staff, they might not even know who the director is. They may not know, they know the name, but they may not know their face, or they may not feel comfortable coming to say hi. So taking the time to build relationships with each and every employee, I think is really key. And it enables you to have those harder conversations.
And I feel like one of the things that I see a lot is that animal shelter directors are tyrants, and they're really monsters. They're really monstrous to their employees. And it has been, in teaching the apprenticeships, one of the things that I hope to do is to empower staff to hold them accountable as well and to manage up. And I think it's up to those of us who are trying to change things to not turn into those tyrants. And in animal welfare, that is really hard. Like, you have to actively fight against that, because again, the system is set up for us to be that, but also to be really ineffectual, to not accomplish what we need to accomplish when we create change. So I think that there is this, the thing that I just go back to a lot is this self-reflexiveness combined with total honesty and candor. So it's like, I will call an employee in ready to issue discipline or confront them. And I think that, like, it's really been a learning lesson to have to stop and ask them what's up. And I learned this from my current boss, who has been a real mentor to me. And I figured out that when he's like pissed at me, he doesn't say that. He says, can you explain to me what you were thinking with this? Not in a condescending way, not in a sarcastic way. He really approaches me with curiosity. Like, what were you thinking when you did this? And I can't tell you a time when I couldn't explain what I was thinking. I think he has other reports that can't, but it taught me a lot about humility around thinking we know something. And So I think that honesty piece, especially somebody asked about the toxic employee who's a ringleader, you have to just bring them in your office and say, this isn't working. This can't continue this way. How do you want to change it? That is the hardest thing in the world to do, because I mean, those people usually scare the crap out of me too. But you've got to do it as the boss, because you're protecting your other employees from that person, because that person is no doubt bullying other employees if they are a ringleader who's resistant to change.
I'd like to step in if I can. I'm very nervous to, I've been listening to this, and I can tell y'all that, and I'm going to try not to get emotional. I was that toxic person for so long for our organization and for my personal rescue. And I didn't realize I was that person because it was so natural for me. And I think a lot of it is from compassion fatigue. It's from doing something by yourself for a very long time, and then building a team, and then you're like a dictator for these people because this is the way you've done it. And you are so unaccepting of new ways, better ways to do it because it's so comfortable for you. And I lost so many amazing team members and friends by being this dictator and not even realizing that I was such a horrible person. And I wasn't in this field. I mean, I've been here for 14 years as a volunteer coordinator and a foster coordinator and the rescue coordinator. But I was doing such a horrible job of it. And I didn't even realize, I was running great people away because I was so, it's my way or the highway, period. And I was in a job that I was miserable in. I was in the architecture field and I was doing rescue on the side, but as y'all all know, this is so time consuming, and it consumes every aspect of your life if you allow it. And I was so miserable in it from the time when I first started, and it was such an amazing thing. I loved doing it. And then the politics of it and the people that you deal with on a daily basis, the owner surrenders, the threats you get, if you don't take this dog or cat, we're going to shoot it. It turns you into such a horrible, it puts you in a bad place. And so I quit my job in July, and when I got hired on here and took a little break, and in that 2-week break, I realized how miserable I truly was and how horrible I was to everyone. And I had to eat a lot of crow, and trying to build back up relationships and stuff has been really hard. And so I will say that sometimes the people who are the most toxic don't even realize they are that person, because I was that person. And as much as I love animals, like I love animals so much more than people, it's my passion. I wasn't being effective in the things that I was doing. I was essentially hindering the process. And so I've had to take a step back and go, wow, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And I started taking some effective communication courses through our insurance, which was an amazing thing, figuring out how to talk to people without being condescending, without basically being a bitch. Excuse my language, but because that was the way I knew, you do it this way, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. But that's not effective in our field. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing that, Brandy. And I totally I in so many ways, I feel the same way. I have a lot of shame when I look back and think about how I talk to people, because it's
so embarrassing, because you don't even, again, I know from y'all's perspective, you're probably like, how do you not realize? But you truly don't realize. And that's not an excuse, because I, again, have lost so many amazing team members through the volunteer program, through my own rescue, that, I just feel awful. I mean, there's no way to go back and correct those relationships. You can apologize and you have to move on. But
I'm gonna interrupt you because we're
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. We're just short on time, and I want to get in a couple.
Yeah,
others.
I'm sorry. I just
No, you're good. You're good. And I think everybody. There's a lot of comments. People really this sharing and having humility and being vulnerable is like how we get better, and it's like how we do rise as leaders. You know. So I think I speak for everyone on this con stage. Just really appreciate you speaking out and sharing that.
Well, I appreciate y'all because y'all are a great sounding board for things like this, because people that aren't in the animal field have no clue what we all go through. You know, it's a struggle daily.
Well, we're gonna be reaching out to you to share a blog about that. But I also shared in the you'll see that I shared in the chat. If you listen to one podcast this month, this one is so good. It's like 30 minutes and it's called The Perils of Power. It's so interesting. It's basically about how your brain functionally changes the more power you get. And they do studies about how as people get increasing social power, they actually start to break minor laws more, like running red lights. And it talks about how people lose power too, which is that you lose power the moment that people perceive that you don't have humility and grace in your leadership. So it's really interesting. And for me, it really helped me see a lot of what I've seen in animal welfare, but of course in politics as well. So it's a great listen. And I just want to repeat one more time that all of this comes back to yourself. Even though managing employees will never change. I don't care if you have an all volunteer organization or you have a giant one or a tiny one. I've just been in so many of them, and it won't be any different. Your particular brand of toxic employee might be a little bit different depending on where you are and how much power they have, but it's always going to be the same. And it's that listening combined with total candor and honesty that I think is the right formula, along with managing expectations for how everyone is going to treat everyone. And this also gets to the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations. This is not disconnected from diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations. And when we allow racism, when we allow bullying, when we allow transphobia, when we allow people to be discriminated against by our staff, we are enabling a workplace culture that is really toxic. And if I hear one more person ask, like, why aren't more people of color working in my organization? Look at how people are treated both in the public and in your organization. And that gives you all the answers you need. And so this workplace culture agreement is really important for that too. And one of the things that I started doing about 3 years ago is anytime there would be what I considered hate speech used by an employee, which is way more common than you'd ever imagine, I actually took it through a formal HR process. And so anything like that went through a formal HR process. It didn't always go anywhere, but we felt that it was so important to take that kind of stuff seriously, whether it was directed towards a member of the public or our staff, because the way that our staff talk about the public, do you think that our other staff aren't feeling that? Like they're seeing the way your staff talk about that member of the public that just came into surrender, and they're thinking about their own family or they're thinking about themselves. And all of this stuff is super connected. And so I'm really passionate about this topic because I don't think animal shelters are safe places for a whole lot of people to work and volunteer in. And we as leaders have to do a better job and put a focus on them if we're going to make these safe spaces, because you can say that you want to have diversity in your organization, but if your organization is in a safe space, or if maybe you don't even know what that would look like, that's where we've got to put the time in. And I'm learning every day. I think every day I'm like, oh, wow, I can't believe we were doing X. At our organization, we were pretty frequently discriminating against people with physical disabilities as an organization. And I wasn't really even aware of that. And so from the leadership level, I think because we're in crisis so much, there's a real disconnect for some of us. Like we're just trying to survive a day. And it's kind of like, it's been cool during COVID to see us all take a step back and say like, wow, we can't fix this without also addressing this.
Thanks for mentioning that. And I think there's some low-hanging fruit that could be really useful. And I hope to have a little time to kind of write some of this out, but things like putting language in your job descriptions of, you know, encouraging people of color to apply, encouraging queer people to apply, making sure that you don't have blanket, we're trying to do this at APA right now. Like we have like a blanket statement that says in all of our job descriptions, you know, you have to be able to like to be able to bend and lift and stand and all of these things, which isn't true for a majority of for a lot of our jobs. So just low hanging fruit like that sort of like opens up and makes people like, I know for me, when I've seen that language in the past, it helps motivate me to apply for jobs when I see that there's inclusivity being, you know, put at the front. I'm wondering, like with Haas, and thinking going back to onboarding and going back to just sort of like some solutions, like because this is so new for all of us, it's sort of like could be a reset button for our organizations if we wanted it to be potentially. Would you recommend, like for something like this, that we would build onboarding for everybody to kind of go through, whether they've been at the organization for a long time or are just starting?
Yeah, well, so sort of, it depends on the organization. My organization, for instance, had incredibly high turnover. We were doing training and retraining every 2 months, starting out a whole new group of 25 staff members. So it really depends on the size of your organization. I think that you don't have to wait. I don't want people to leave here and feel like they have to wait to do something. Like we're going to have to wait and press reset. You can do this stuff starting tomorrow. I'll give you an easy example. One of the things that I've noticed in every shelter I've gone into is that certain staff members, and it tends to be the ones that are otherwise problematic, use disparaging language to talk about animals, either as groups or individuals. Just put a stop to that. Like a zero tolerance policy to talking badly about the animals in our care is an easy way tomorrow to just walk in and say no. I have like my mean little, this is Rory and I's, he's not mean. He was considered mean little Chihuahua. And I remember how the staff at the shelter he was at talked to him, and it was abusive. And it's like, I think this kindness and like, in expecting kindness and respect towards all people and animals, you can start that tomorrow. Like you don't have to wait to say, look, here's the reset. This is the expectation. We're not going to have a laugh at the expense of another person. We're not going to talk badly about animals and people that we're serving. Little things like that, those are not crazy. They're not like, but you'd be surprised at how much they creep into your culture. Do any of you feel like you see this in your culture and you're like, huh, that is true. That is something we do. Like, are any of you, as I'm talking, thinking like, yeah, I guess we could do better with some of that? Right. So if your reset is just kindness and respect to all people and animals, then that's all you need. I mean, to me, that's really the only rule you need. And then no ego, maybe. The ego thing is big. It's what Brandy was talking about. It's what I've been talking about. That piece is big, but the kindness and respect thing is an easy way to start. And then you can start to call out when you see those things not happening. And more importantly, call out when you do see them happening. We have this thing that we started at AAC, which Casey will remember. We had the shout out board, and I love the shout out board. It was these little yellow slips of paper, and people could just write when they saw someone doing something awesome or being really nice. And the walls were covered in these yellow pieces of paper. We were having to take them down all the time because people were writing, and volunteers and staff could do it. And it was just a way to say, like, I saw you hugging that dog who was really scared to go in his kennel and making him feel better. Or I saw Casey help a customer who seemed confused about where they were, and she was really nice to them. Little stuff. And I think if you want to start one other thing today, it's find more ways to recognize the good, because you will hit the tipping point. And the best way to neutralize the toxic person is to just like kill them with the kindness of the organization, and to show that is how you move up in the organization. It's how by the time I could leave, I can tell you that my favorite employees it wasn't personal. It was because they modeled the behaviors in the workplace culture agreement, and they were hardworking, go-getter employees. And that was really helpful for me too. Chris is asking how we initiated the process to start building the workplace expectations document. So we had a template from a 2009 HSUS document, and you can use ours as your template if you want. And we basically made it an editable doc, and we had stakeholder meetings. So we met with the staff. At the time it was in person, and we walked line by line through the document. What's missing? What did they get wrong here? What do they need? It was interesting. At AAC, we didn't do this. We did have feedback opportunities. We didn't do them in person, and it made a big difference. And so just taking the time to do the feedback, especially with volunteers, I don't know why. I mean, we manage a very challenging volunteer program, but to our volunteers, this is like gospel. They like read this agreement and they're like, uh-oh. So, and volunteers are notoriously hard to hold accountable for misbehavior. So this really helps. But yeah, I think including them is the piece that people miss because it takes a while, but you'd be better off taking several months to get it right. And then have everyone has to physically sign it. It's not enough to say, like, read this thing, they have to sign it. And the great part about that is when they violate it, you pull out their copy with their signature on it and say, like, look, you helped us write this and you agreed to it, and what's happening here, because you just called Elizabeth a idiot or whatever.
There was a comment in here about social media and how do you help people not say offensive things about each other on social media. Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I feel like this is such a sad story, but I think I was the original person shouting around the United States that we needed internal Facebook groups. And a year and a half ago, I got the county to get rid of it because it was so evil. And I couldn't fix it. No matter what, I would have meetings. I would write these compelling emails about Buddhism. I mean, I would do everything and I couldn't fix it. People are just evil on Facebook. So we got rid of our internal page. I think there's some regrets about that. The volunteers have their own page. And what we've done is we've asked staff not to participate for their own mental health. We have asked the volunteers not to invite them to join. And we have a requirement that volunteers are not allowed to tag staff. Unless there is a true emergency and somebody's dying and it's like one avenue of communication. This has worked, but I don't know. I am at the point with Facebook where I just don't. I love it for like our kind of communication. Like I love the Haas internal group, but when you've got those toxic people, it's just giving them a platform where they've got a giant audience. Did everyone need to attend the stakeholder meetings? Attendance was voluntary. Attendance to everything in our organization is voluntary because, however, at the same time, we had to create space for our frontline workers to come because they're the ones that generally miss meetings. So we actually had to close the shelter and make it a whole day so that they actually had time to come. Because when you make things voluntary, a lot of times you're going to miss out on those employees who are on your front lines. Wow, I can't believe that hour went so fast.
It always goes by so quickly. It's one of my favorite hours of the week. Thanks everybody. I hope this has been helpful. And Kelly, what's our topic next week? And I want to shout out to Kelly. Kelly's been doing so much of the heavy lifting behind the scenes of all the logistics and coordination of getting people here. And so thank you, Kelly, for.
Kelly's a good example of the 2% at the very edge of the people who are just on board and leading the way. And I think I've tried to hire her about 10 times now, so she won't do it.
Thank you.
She knows I would overwork her and ask her to do everything, I think.
No, that's not it. Next week is, we're talking about Lost and Found with Gina Knapp.
Awesome. I'm really excited. So we're going to be talking about Lost and Found. Exciting.
I got to run you guys to another meeting. I'll see you all soon. And please get in touch with me. I'm on Facebook. Kristen Hassan, you can just find me there or email me. It's kristen.hassan@americanpetslive.org. But I'm happy to talk about any of this, and if I can be helpful. I think it's an area that our predecessors did not focus enough on, and we need to do better. So
Thanks so much. Great to see y'all.